Find another seat. I'm not moving. That's my seat. And you just made this flight a much bigger problem. Hold this aircraft. Do not push back.
Part 1. The public wrong. The first thing Marcus Ellison noticed was not the man sitting in his seat. It was the empty space around him. Row 2 of the Meridian Atlantic flight had always felt strangely quiet. The first-class cabin was designed that way, with wider aisles, softer lighting, and enough distance between passengers that nobody had to hear someone else's phone call or dinner conversation. Marcus had chosen the window seat because he liked watching the ground disappear before meetings. It reminded him that every company, every contract, every reputation was built one small piece at a time. He placed his leather notebook in the seat pocket and checked the small printed card attached to his boarding pass. 2A, window, confirmed. Then he looked up. A man in his late 50s was already seated there. The passenger wore a navy blazer, expensive-looking shoes, and the relaxed expression of someone who believed the problem in front of him belonged to someone else. Marcus stopped beside the row. "Excuse me," he said. "I think there's been a mix-up. That's my seat." The man glanced at the boarding pass in Marcus's hand, then back at Marcus, not aggressively, not loudly. Just long enough for Marcus to recognize the familiar calculation. The kind that happened before a person decided whether they needed to listen. "I'm pretty sure this is where I'm supposed to be," the man said. Marcus looked at the seat number above the window. 2A. "Yes," the man replied. "Exactly." A flight attendant approaching from the galley noticed the pause. "Everything okay here?" Marcus handed over his boarding pass. "I believe we have a seating issue." The attendant scanned the ticket. "Mr. Ellison, let me take a look." The passenger leaned back. "Already checked in," he said. "I upgraded this seat through the app yesterday." Marcus heard the emphasis. Not the information. The ownership of the information. The assumption that his explanation arrived first and therefore mattered more. The attendant checked the system on her tablet. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" The man handed it over. She studied the screen for several seconds. "I'm sorry, but this seat is assigned to Mr. Ellison." The passenger frowned. "Are you sure?" The attendant nodded. "Yes." There was a pause. Then the man looked at Marcus again. "I think there's probably another seat available." It was phrased like a suggestion. It wasn't. Marcus knew that tone. He had heard versions of it in boardrooms, conference halls, and investor meetings before people knew his name. The request always sounded reasonable when spoken slowly enough. "Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe you're mistaken. Maybe you should be the one adjusting." Marcus kept his voice even. "I'm happy to let the crew handle it." The attendant tapped her tablet. "Sir, I'll need you to move to your assigned seat." The passenger looked around the cabin. A few people had started paying attention. "I don't understand why this is becoming such a big issue." Nobody had raised their voice. Nobody had made a scene. That almost made it harder, because Marcus knew how easily a quiet disagreement could become a story about the wrong person being difficult. The attendant lowered her voice. "Sir, I just need to confirm your seat assignment." She checked again. Then her expression changed slightly, not surprise. "Concern, Mr. Ellison. Could you wait here for just a moment?" Marcus noticed the wording. Not "sit down," not "we'll fix this." "Wait here." He was part of the uncertainty. He stepped back into the aisle. The passenger remained in 2A. A man across the aisle looked at Marcus, then looked away. A woman near the front pulled out her phone, not recording, just checking the time. The aircraft door was still open. The engines had not started. The flight was already running behind schedule. And Marcus knew something important had happened before anyone announced it. The problem was no longer just a seat. It was the story being created around that seat. The attendant returned with a second crew member. "Mr. Ellison, may we speak with you briefly?" Marcus picked up his notebook. "Sure." As he followed them toward the galley, he glanced once more at the passenger sitting comfortably in 2A. The man looked certain. That certainty bothered Marcus more than the mistake itself, because mistakes could be corrected. But certainty had a way of surviving facts. Part 2, the wrong story Gans authority Marcus stood near the galley curtain, while the lead flight attendant, Denise Harper, reviewed something on her tablet for the third time. Behind her, the cabin continued its slow preparation for departure. Overhead bins clicked shut. A coffee machine hissed briefly. Someone laughed 2 rows behind them, unaware that a quiet conflict was forming inches away. "Mr. Ellison." Denise said. I just want to make sure we understand what happened. Marcus looked at her. What happened is that my assigned seat is occupied. And she nodded. And the passenger in that seat believes he has that assignment. Does he? Denise hesitated. He has a first-class upgrade confirmation. Marcus waited. That pause told him there was more. An upgrade confirmation isn't the same as a seat assignment. Not always, Denise said carefully. Sometimes the system updates differently depending on when the upgrade clears. Marcus looked toward the cabin. So the question is whether his confirmation gave him that exact seat. Yes. And has anyone checked? Denise glanced down. We're checking. Marcus almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because he had spent 15 years building companies around systems, and he knew when people were searching for an answer and when they were searching for a version of events they could live with. Can I ask something? Marcus said. Of course. Why was I asked to leave the area instead of the person sitting in the wrong seat? Denise's expression tightened slightly. I'm not saying you were in the wrong. No? Marcus kept his voice calm, but the process started with moving me away from the seat I was assigned. Denise looked uncomfortable. The second crew member, a younger flight attendant named Aaron, stepped in. Sir, we're just trying to avoid making this uncomfortable for everyone. Marcus looked at him. I agree. The answer seemed to surprise Aaron, Marcus continued. Nah. I also think the easiest way to avoid discomfort is to start with the information that already exists. He held up his boarding pass. The small paper looked ordinary. That was the strange thing about important documents. They rarely looked important. A contract, a permit, a receipt, a ticket. The value was not in the paper. It was in whether people respected what it represented. Denise tapped her tablet again. Mr. Ellison, may I ask why you didn't just take another available seat? Marcus looked at her. There it was, the question underneath the question. Why not make this easier? Why not absorb the inconvenience? Why insist? He chose this seat, he said. I paid for this seat, and I boarded with this seat assigned to me. Denise nodded slowly. I understand. But Marcus noticed she did not say she agreed. Those were different things. A few minutes later, a supervisor arrived. His name was Robert Vale. He wore the uniform of someone who had spent enough years in aviation to know exactly how much authority his position carried. Not enough to command the entire aircraft, but enough that passengers usually stopped arguing when he appeared. Mr. Ellison, Robert said, I'm Robert, the cabin service supervisor. We're trying to resolve a seating discrepancy. Marcus nodded. Robert turned to the passenger in 2A. Sir, may I see your documentation again? The man handed it over. Robert studied it. Then he looked at Marcus. Mr. Ellison, can I ask if you're traveling alone today? Marcus paused. The question had nothing to do with the seat. Yes, and is this flight connected to business? Marcus looked at him. Yes. Robert nodded as if filing that away. Pierce noticed. Not the question. The assumption behind it. If he was traveling for business, maybe he was someone who could be inconvenienced. Someone who would understand. Someone who would not want attention. The passenger in 2A leaned slightly into the aisle. I really don't want this to become a whole thing, he said. Marcus looked at him. Neither did he. It was the part nobody seemed to understand. Marcus had no interest in humiliating anyone. He had no desire to prove a point to strangers before a 6-hour flight. But there was a difference between avoiding conflict and accepting a false record of what happened. Robert stepped closer. Sir, perhaps we can move you temporarily while we investigate. Marcus looked at the supervisor. Move me where? We have a seat available farther back. So the person whose seat assignment is unclear stays here, and the person whose assignment is confirmed moves? Hubert did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. The woman across the aisle, who had glanced over earlier, finally spoke. Excuse me. Everyone turned. She was in her 40s, wearing a gray sweater and holding a notebook on her lap. I saw him come in, she said, pointing toward Marcus. He checked the number before he sat down. He wasn't confused. Robert gave her a polite expression. Thank you, Mum. We'll handle it. She looked at him. No, I watched the whole thing. A small shift happened. Not a victory, not yet, just a crack. Because until that moment, the situation existed as two competing stories. The passenger's story, a misunderstanding. A difficult traveler, a simple solution. Now there was another piece. Someone had seen the beginning. The woman closed her notebook. My name is Claire Benton, she said. I was sitting here before boarding started. I remember because I noticed his notebook. He put it in the seat pocket before anyone said anything. Marcus looked at her. Almost meaningless, except it wasn't. Because memory did not always preserve arguments. Sometimes it preserved ordinary things. Someone carried, where they stood, what happened before everyone started choosing sides. Robert thanked her and stepped away, but Marcus noticed something else. The passenger in 2A was no longer relaxed. He was watching Claire, not Marcus. Claire, and Marcus understood why. The story had changed. The question was no longer only whether he belonged in the seat. The question was whether someone had already decided he didn't. 5 minutes later, Robert returned with a different expression. The tablet was still in his hand. But now there was another name on the screen, and this time the problem was no longer a seat assignment. It was an account record. Part 3. The irreversible line. Marcus had learned a long time ago that organizations rarely collapsed because one person made one bad decision. They collapsed because small decisions became records. A note in a system, a checkbox marked incorrectly, a sentence repeated enough times that nobody remembered who first said it. Robert Vale stood beside the galley reading something on the tablet. "Mr. Ellison," he said, "there seems to be an issue with the passenger manifest." Marcus looked at him. "What kind of issue?" Robert glanced toward the front cabin before answering. "The system shows 2 passengers connected to the same seat assignment." Chris waited. "That sounds like a system error." "Yes," Robert said. "We're trying to determine how it happened." Marcus looked past him toward 2A. The passenger was still sitting there, still comfortable, still acting as if the delay was an inconvenience happening around him rather than something he was involved in. "Has his boarding pass been verified?" Marcus asked. Robert nodded. "Yes, and mine?" "Yes. Then what exactly are we determining?" Robert's mouth opened slightly, then closed. The answer was complicated, not because the facts were complicated. Because the facts were becoming inconvenient. Aviation ran on precision. Calculations. Maintenance logs, passenger counts, security procedures. Small details mattered because thousands of lives depended on people respecting systems they could not see. But systems were only as reliable as the people willing to follow them. Robert lowered his voice. "Mr. Ellison, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to understand this is standard procedure." Marcus recognized the sentence. Whenever someone said standard procedure, there was usually a question coming next that they hoped would sound less personal. "Go ahead. Would you be willing to accept a seat change so we can close this issue before departure?" Marcus looked at him. "Is that the standard procedure?" Hubert paused. "It's one option." "No," Marcus said. "The question was whether it's the procedure." The supervisor looked away for a second. A tiny movement, but Marcus noticed. He had spent years in negotiations watching people answer questions they wished they had been asked. "Mr. Ellison," Rofford said, "we're trying to help everyone get where they need to go." "I understand. Then maybe we can find a practical solution." Marcus looked back at the cabin. A practical solution. Those words had built entire industries. Sometimes they meant efficiency. Sometimes they meant someone else carrying the cost. "I'm not refusing to cooperate," Marcus said. "I'm asking that the same process applies to everyone." Before Robert could respond, Claire spoke again from across the aisle. "Can I ask something?" Robert turned. "Yes, Mom? If the system is wrong, shouldn't you figure out why before deciding who moves?" The question was simple. That made it difficult to avoid. Robert gave a professional smile. "We appreciate your concern, but we have procedures for these situations." Claire looked at him. "And are those procedures written down?" Robert's smile faded slightly. Marcus noticed that too. Claire was not being confrontational. She was being precise. There was a difference. The passenger in 2A finally leaned forward. "Look," he said, "I don't know why everyone is acting like I did something wrong." Marcus turned toward him. The man's voice was no longer relaxed. "I booked my upgrade. I followed the rules." Marcus believed him. That was the uncomfortable part. The man might actually believe he had done nothing wrong. The problem was not only intention. The problem was what happened when uncertainty appeared. Who got questioned first? Who was expected to adjust? Who was treated as the source of the problem? Robert checked the tablet again. Then he looked at Marcus. "Sir, I'm going to need your identification." Marcus stared at him. "My identification?" "Yes. Just to verify the account." Marcus slowly reached into his jacket pocket. He carried a driver's license like everyone else. He carried a passport when traveling internationally, but he knew what had just happened. The seat problem had transformed. The original question was, who belongs in 2A? Now it had become, who are you? And that change mattered. He handed over his identification. Hubert scanned it. The tablet beeped once, then again. The supervisor's expression changed. Silly. Not dramatically, just enough. Marcus noticed. What did it show? Robert looked at the screen. I'm not sure. That's usually when people are sure something matters. Robert stepped away. For several seconds, he spoke quietly with Denise. Marcus could not hear every word. He caught pieces. Priority account? Corporate travel? Verification? Then Denise looked toward him. Not with recognition. Not yet. With confusion. That interested Marcus, because recognition would have been easier. Recognition meant his name had arrived before him. Confusion meant the system had found something unexpected. A few rows ahead, the passenger in 2A checked his phone. His face tightened. A notification had appeared. Marcus did not know what it said, but he knew the expression. It was the expression of someone realizing a small inconvenience had become attached to a larger consequence. Robert returned. Mr. Ellison. Yes, we're going to need to delay boarding. The cabin became quieter. Not silent. Just quieter. Passengers looked up from their screens. A child stopped kicking the seat behind them. Someone near the aisle asked if there was a mechanical issue. Robert raised his hand. To safety. We're resolving a documentation matter. Marcus looked at the open aircraft door. The flight had not moved. No engines. New departure. No easy way for anyone to pretend this would disappear after takeoff, Robert continued. Until we resolve the discrepancy, nobody can be seated in that location. Marcus looked at 2A. For the first time, the passenger stood. Not because someone forced him, because the situation had finally become real, and Marcus understood something important. The seat had never been the whole story. The seat was just where the story became visible. Part 4. Counterforce and personal cost. Marcus did not enjoy being recognized. People assumed that was strange. They thought someone who built a company from nothing, who appeared on financial panels, who had his name printed on buildings and research grants, would enjoy the moment when a room changed after learning who he was. Marcus never did, because the room was not changing because of him. It was changing because of information. And he had spent enough years watching people ignore information until it became expensive. He sat in the waiting area near Gate 14 while Meridian Atlantic paused the boarding process. The first-class passengers had been asked to remain nearby. Some stood in small groups discussing the delay. Others pretended not to be interested while listening carefully. The passenger who had taken 2A was sitting 3 chairs away. His name, Marcus had learned from the crew, was Daniel Whitmore. Daniel looked uncomfortable now, not angry, not confident, just uncomfortable. Marcus recognized that feeling too. It was the moment when a person realized the story they had been telling themselves might not survive contact with other people's memories. Claire Benton sat across from Marcus. I hope you don't think I was trying to make things worse, she said. Marcus looked up from his notebook. You didn't. I just kept thinking about what I saw. That's usually how the important things happen. Claire smiled slightly. I'm not sure I've ever heard someone describe a delayed flight as important. Marcus looked at the empty gate screen. For a moment they both laughed. It was brief, almost accidental, but Marcus appreciated it. The situation had become heavy enough that a normal human moment felt unusual. Claire closed her notebook. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you just tell them who you are? Marcus knew the question was coming eventually. Most people asked it after they discovered his identity. Why didn't you use your position? Why didn't you make them listen? Why didn't you end it faster? He looked down at the boarding pass still in his hand. Because the person in that seat should not have mattered less because I owned more. Claire studied him. That's a very practiced answer. Marcus smiled. Does that mean it's not true? No. He paused. It means I've had to explain it more than once. Marcus had learned this lesson years earlier, during the first acquisition of his company, Ellison Grid Systems. At the time, he was 32 and had developed a data security platform used by hospitals and regional banks. Investors loved the technology. They loved the growth numbers. But during his first major financing meeting, one executive spent 20 minutes asking Marcus questions about whether he was comfortable around technical teams. Marcus remembered that phrase. comfortable around. As if expertise was a room he had entered rather than a place he belonged. He had answered every question. He had won the investment. But the memory stayed because the hardest part was not proving he was capable. The hardest part was realizing some people needed proof before they offered basic respect. A notification appeared on Claire's phone. She looked at it, then frowned. What? She turned the screen slightly. A message from Meridian Atlantic's customer service system. Flight delay, operational review in progress. Marcus looked at it. That was fast. Fast. Maybe. He looked toward the gate agents. Airlines were built around speed, boarding windows, action times, aircraft utilization. A delay created pressure. Pressure created shortcuts. And shortcuts were where small assumptions became official decisions. A few minutes later, Denise Harper approached. Mr. Ellison? Marcus stood. Yes? Did we speak privately? They moved several steps away. Denise looked different from earlier, less defensive, more careful. First, I want to apologize for the confusion. Marcus nodded. Thank you. I also want to explain that we are still investigating what caused the assignment conflict. Okay. Denise glanced down. The system shows that Mr. Whitmore's upgrade was approved, but the seat assignment was modified afterward. Modified by whom? That's what we're trying to determine. Marcus waited. And why was my account requested for additional verification? Denise hesitated. There it was again. The hesitation before a person decided how much truth was safe to share. Because your account has a corporate travel profile. Marcus nodded. That doesn't answer my question. Denise looked uncomfortable. No, it doesn't. For the first time, Marcus felt that someone on the airline side understood the difference between explaining a process and answering for it. Denise lowered her voice. The system flagged your reservation after a manual adjustment. Marcus looked at her. Manual adjustment by whom? We don't know yet. That answer bothered him more than the mistake. Because mistakes had causes. Someone had changed something. Someone had touched the record. And someone had created a situation where the person holding the confirmed seat became the person being questioned. Marcus looked through the glass window toward the aircraft. He had a board meeting the next morning in Chicago. A team of engineers was waiting for his approval on a safety contract. His daughter had asked him to call before she went to sleep because she wanted to tell him about a science project she had been working on. This was the part people never saw. They saw the confrontation. They saw the eventual correction. They rarely saw everything around it. The missed calls, the delayed promises, the mental energy spent deciding whether to fight something that should never have required a fight. Denise handed him a card. My direct contact information. Marcus took it. If you believe something improper happened, I want to make sure it's reviewed correctly. He looked at the card. Not an apology, not a solution. The beginning. Thank you, he said. When he returned to his seat, Daniel Whitmore stood nearby. For the first time, he looked directly at Marcus. I didn't know. He just looked at him. About what? Daniel swallowed. About you. Marcus held his gaze. That's the problem. Daniel looked away. No, I mean, he stopped, because he knew the sentence he was about to finish. He didn't know Marcus was wealthy. He didn't know Marcus had influence. He didn't know Marcus could make calls. But none of those things should have been required. The gate screen changed. Departure delayed. Furtively revealed. The flight was no longer waiting for a seat. It was waiting for the truth behind the seat, and somewhere inside Meridian Atlantic's system, a record had changed. The question was who changed it, and why. Part 5. The reversal or deeper problem. Marcus had expected recognition to arrive like a door opening. Instead, it arrived like a question. 30 minutes after boarding was paused, Denise Harper returned with 2 people from Meridian Atlantic's operations team. They did not approach with the urgency of people responding to a passenger complaint. They approached like people responding to a system failure. That difference mattered. Mr. Ellison, Denise said, this is Karen Doyle from Customer Operations and Victor Hayes from Flight Systems Review. Marcus shook their hands. Karen carried a thin folder. Victor carried a laptop. Not a dramatic stack of documents, not a room full of executives, just 2 people, and the tools they needed to understand what happened. That was usually how real accountability started. Not with a speech, with someone willing to look. We've completed the first review of the reservation history, Victor said. Marcus nodded. And? Victor opened the laptop. Your original seat assignment was correct. Daniel Whitmore, standing several feet away, looked down. Marcus did not. He already knew that. The seat was never the difficult part. The issue, Victor continued, was a manual change made after your boarding pass was issued. Marcus looked at him. Made by whom? Victor glanced at Karen. We're still confirming that. Marcus studied their faces. Not because he expected them to know everything, because he wanted to know whether they were trying to find the answer or trying to manage his reaction. Karen opened the folder. The change was made through an internal support channel used for premium travel adjustments. Premium travel adjustments, Marcus repeated. Yes. Meaning? Corporate accounts, special assistance, loyalty exceptions, schedule recovery. Marcus nodded. And my reservation was changed through that channel? Yes. Why? Karen looked uncomfortable. Don't know yet. Marcus looked toward Daniel. The other passenger shifted his weight. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Daniel said quietly, I didn't request anyone to move him. Yours turned. Daniel looked embarrassed. I contacted support because my upgrade showed first class, but when I boarded, the app still displayed an old seat number. Marcus listened. And what did they tell you? Daniel rubbed his forehead. They said they would take care of it. Those words stayed in the air. Take care of it. A phrase that sounded harmless. A phrase that could mean almost anything. Victor typed something into the system. Mr. Whitmore's upgrade request came through a customer assistance queue. Was it approved? Yes. Was my seat available? No, Marcus nodded slowly. So someone solved his problem by changing mine. Nobody answered, because that was the sentence everyone had been avoiding. Not because it was complicated, because saying it clearly made responsibility visible. Karen looked down at the folder. Here's one more thing. Marcus waited. The manual adjustment included an internal note. What did it say? Karen hesitated. Then she read from the document. Passenger seated in disputed location. Customer may resist reassignment. Verify identity before escalation. Marcus felt something inside him go still. Not anger, something heavier, because that note explained everything that happened afterward. The additional identification request, the assumption that he might be the difficult passenger, the movement away from the seat. The process had not only recorded a change, it had prepared people for a version of him. Marcus looked at Karen. Who wrote that? You're investigating. Was it based on anything I did? No. Was I disruptive? No. Did I refuse instructions? No. The answers came quickly now because facts were easier once someone finally asked the right questions. Claire Benton had been listening from nearby. She looked at Marcus, then at the Meridian Atlantic employees. So the system told you he might be a problem before he actually was one? Nobody responded. Marcus looked at the floor for a moment. He thought about his father, a man who worked 30 years repairing industrial equipment and kept every service receipt in a metal box in the garage. Marcus used to ask why he saved old papers nobody would ever look at. His father always said the same thing. Because when people disagree about what happened, paper remembers better than people do. Marcus had never forgotten that. He looked at Victor's laptop. Is the adjustment log preserved? Victor nodded. Yes. Can it be changed? Not without an audit trail. Good. Karen looked at him. You're asking for an investigation? Marcus looked back at the aircraft. Passengers were still waiting. Families were still trying to reach destinations. Crew members were still working. I'm asking for the record to be accurate. Bill nodded. And what about the flight? Marcus almost laughed. Even now, people wanted to know if he would use his power to punish, cancel, remove, demand. He shook his head. The flight should leave when it's ready to leave. That answer surprised several people, including Daniel, because they had expected the billionaire to make the situation bigger. Instead, Marcus was making it smaller, more precise. One wrong record, indecision, one process that needed correction. Victor closed his laptop. There is another issue. Marcus looked at him. What? The manual change wasn't isolated. A pause. How many? We don't know yet. Marcus looked at Karen. You mean this happened before? Karen did not answer immediately, but she did not need to. The hesitation answered for her. The seat assignment had been one incident. The system behind it might be the real story. And Marcus realized the most important thing about what happened on that plane. The person who took his seat had not created the entire problem. Someone had built a process where certain passengers were easier to move than others. The aircraft was still grounded. But now the question had changed, not who belonged in 2A, The question was how many people had been moved without anyone asking why. Part 6. The second problem, in motion. The flight did not leave that afternoon. Eden. Meridian Atlantic announced the delay as a customer service systems review, which was accurate enough to satisfy a public statement, and vague enough to avoid explaining what had actually happened. Marcus noticed that organizations often chose words the same way people chose clothing. They selected what they wanted others to see. The passengers were eventually moved to another aircraft. The original plane remained at the gate while operations teams reviewed the reservation system. Nobody was removed from the airline. Nobody was publicly blamed. That mattered to Marcus, because accountability was not the same thing as punishment. He sat in a conference room near the terminal with Victor Hayes and Karen Doyle while Denise joined through a video call. The room had a long table, a wall-mounted screen, and the quiet discomfort of a place designed for problems nobody wanted to discuss publicly. Victor displayed the reservation timeline. "Your seat assignment was created at purchase," he said. "No issue there." A line appeared. 48 hours before departure, Mr. Whitmore's upgrade request entered the system. Another line. 26 hours before departure, his upgrade was approved. Another. 3 hours before departure, your seat assignment was manually changed. Marcus leaned forward. By the same system? No. By a person? Yes. Who had authority to do that? Victor looked at the screen. Customer operations representatives can make certain seating changes. Can they move a confirmed first-class passenger? Under specific conditions. What conditions? Victor hesitated. Operational necessity. Equipment changes. Accessibility needs. Weight balance issues. Irregular operations. Marcus nodded. Was any of that true here? No. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Marcus noticed. You already know? Victor looked at him. We know those conditions were not present. Then why was it allowed? Nobody answered immediately. Outside the conference room, the terminal continued moving. Announcements, rolling luggage, children asking questions. People living normal moments while a company examined a moment that had gone wrong. Karen finally spoke. And that is what the review is trying to determine. Marcus looked at the screen. The timeline bothered him. Not because someone had made a mistake. Because the system had accepted a reason that did not exist. Show me the note history. Victor opened another window. Several internal entries appeared. Marcus read them carefully. Most were ordinary. Upgrade request received. Passenger contacted. Seat adjustment completed. Then he saw the phrase again. Verify identity before escalation. He looked at Victor. When was that added? During the manual adjustment. By the same person? Yes. Victor folded his hands. We don't know. Marcus looked back at the screen. That was the question that mattered. Not whether someone disliked him. Not whether someone woke up intending harm. The more difficult question was how ordinary decisions could carry assumptions nobody wanted to admit were there. Karen spoke softly. Mr. Listen, I want to be transparent. We are reviewing whether this was a single employee error or whether there are broader process issues. Marcus nodded. That's the right question, she seemed surprised. You think it was only one person? I think people work inside systems. Marcus tapped the table lightly. If a system rewards speed over accuracy, people learn speed. If a system makes certain passengers easier to inconvenience, people learn who gets inconvenienced. Nobody spoke. Marcus did not say it dramatically. He did not need to. The record already said enough. Later that evening, Marcus finally called his daughter. She answered on the second ring. Dad? Hey, are you still in the airport? Yes. Did your meeting get canceled? Marcus smiled. No, the meeting is tomorrow. What happened? He looked around his hotel room. A simple room. A suitcase open on the floor, his jacket hanging over a chair. For a moment, he considered giving the easy answer. Issue. But his daughter was 14. She had already started noticing when adults edited reality to make it easier. Someone changed my seat assignment, he said. Accidentally. He paused. I'm still finding out. That sounds annoying. It is. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, Are you going to do something about it? Marcus looked at the boarding pass on the desk. A small piece of paper that had created a much larger question. I think I already am. How? He smiled by making sure they checked the right thing. After the call, Marcus received an email from Meridian Atlantic. Not an apology. Not yet. A preservation notice. The airline had placed a hold on the relevant system records while the investigation continued. That was a small step, but it was a real one. The next morning, Marcus returned to Chicago. The flight eventually departed after the review team confirmed the system issue would not affect other passengers on the route, but the investigation continued. 3 days later, Karen called. Her voice sounded different, more serious. "Found something," she said. Marcus stopped walking through his office. What? The seat change was not the only adjustment made through that support channel. How many? Yes, 7. Marcus was quiet. 7 passengers? Yes, same employee? No, that answer was worse. Marcus looked out the window at the city below. Then it's not one person. No. Karen took a breath. It's a pattern. And patterns changed everything. A mistake could be corrected. A pattern had to be confronted. Reason. Part 7. The collision and accountability test. Marcus had spent enough years in business to know that patterns were dangerous for one reason. They forced people to stop talking about exceptions. A single incident could be explained away. A misunderstanding. A communication error. A person who made a poor decision. But 7 passengers created a different question. Not what happened. Why was this allowed to happen repeatedly? 3 weeks after the flight delay, Marcus entered Meridian Atlantic's headquarters for the first time. He had expected something larger. Instead, the building looked like most corporate offices. Glass walls, muted carpet, people carrying laptops between meetings. The ordinary appearance of a place where extraordinary decisions were sometimes made. That was the part Marcus found unsettling. Systems that affected thousands of people rarely looked dramatic from the outside. They looked like someone's Tuesday morning. Karen Doyle met him in the lobby. "Appreciate you coming in person." Marcus nodded. "I wanted to understand the review. It's not finished. I know." Karen looked at him. "Most people in your position would have requested immediate action." Marcus adjusted the strap of his briefcase. "I'm not interested in immediate action." "What are you interested in?" "Action." Karen studied him for a moment. Then she led him upstairs. The meeting room was smaller than Marcus expected. There were no executives waiting. Cameras, no prepared statements, just the people directly connected to the process. Victor was there. Denise was there. A compliance officer named Rachel Monroe joined remotely, and at the far end of the table sat a man Marcus had not met. Thomas Reed, Director of Premium Customer Operations. Thomas stood. Mr. Ellison. They shook hands. Thomas's grip was firm, professional. But Marcus noticed something immediately. Thomas did not look angry. He looked tired. That mattered. People who defended broken systems often did so because they feared what fixing them would reveal. Karen began. "We have reviewed 7 cases involving manual seat adjustments through the premium support channel." The screen displayed a summary. "Different dates, different flights, different passengers," Marcus read quietly. "Were these all confirmed seats?" "Yes," Victor said. "Were all replacements approved?" "Yes." "Were all moved passengers informed before the change?" Silence. Marcus looked up. "That was enough," he said. Karen nodded. "No," Thomas leaned forward. "I want to clarify something." Everyone looked at him. The employees who processed these requests were not trying to discriminate against anyone. Marcus looked at him. "I believe you." The answer seemed to surprise Thomas. Pierce continued. "Intent matters, but it's not the only thing that matters." Thomas nodded slowly. "Our employees were trying to solve customer problems, and the people moved." Thomas looked down. "They were affected." That's a gentle word. Thomas accepted the criticism. "Yes." Marcus appreciated that. A person willing to admit a problem was not the same as a person who caused it. But the difference between repair and denial was whether they stayed honest after that. Victor changed the screen. These cases have something in common. The 7 names appeared. Different routes, different employees, different dates. Connects them, Marcus asked. Victor highlighted a column. Priority accommodation notes. Marcus frowned. "What does that mean?" "It's a classification used internally for passengers considered high value or high retention." "High value based on what?" "Revenue relationship." Marcus read the notes. Some passengers had corporate accounts. Some had loyalty status. Some had large travel histories. Then he noticed something else. The displaced passengers. Victor clicked another file. 6 of the 7 were individual travelers. Marcus looked closer. And the 7th, a small business owner. Any other pattern? Victor hesitated, then opened another document. Demographic information was not part of the original review. Marcus understood immediately. "Because you didn't want to assume, correct?" "Good," Victor continued. During compliance analysis, we compared available customer profiles and complaint history. He stopped. Marcus waited. What did you find? Victor looked uncomfortable. The affected passengers were disproportionately from groups that historically report higher rates of service complaints. Vickers did not react immediately. Not because he was surprised, because he wanted precision. Say exactly what you mean. Victor nodded. We found that passengers who were moved through this process were more likely to have reported being treated differently during previous travel interactions. The room became heavier, not because anyone was shocked, because the pattern had moved beyond one employee. It had moved into the experience of customers. Thomas spoke quietly. We need to be careful here. Marcus looked at him. About what? About concluding too much. Vickers nodded. That's fair. He pointed at the screen. But we also need to be careful not to conclude too little. Nobody responded. Rachel, the compliance officer, spoke from the screen. That's why we recommended an independent review. Marcus looked at her. What would that include? Reservation changes, employee permissions, training materials, complaint records, escalation procedures. Good, Rachel continued. And temporary restrictions on manual premium seat changes. Marcus looked at Karen. Have you done that? Karen answered. Yes. That mattered, because accountability was not only what happened after the damage, it was what people did once they understood the risk. Thomas leaned back. I want to say something. Marcus nodded. Thomas looked at him. When you first came to the gate, I would have assumed this was a customer conflict. Marcus said nothing. Thomas continued. Now I understand it was a process conflict. The distinction was important, because process could be changed. But only after people stopped pretending the process was neutral. Karen closed the folder. There is one final issue. Marcus looked at her. What? The employee who changed your reservation. Marcus waited. We identified them. The room became still. Not because Marcus wanted revenge, because names turned abstract failures into human decisions. Who was it? Karen looked at the document in front of her. A senior support specialist. Marcus nodded. And what did they say? Karen hesitated. They said they made the change because they believed the upgraded passenger would be more difficult to relocate. Marcus looked at the table. There it was. The sentence underneath everything. Not hatred, not an open insult, a calculation. Someone decided who would be easier to move, and that decision had been hidden inside a routine action. The investigation had reached the moment where explanation stopped being enough. Now Meridian Atlantic had to decide what accountability actually meant. Part 8. The decision antes cost. The hardest decisions inside organizations were rarely the ones where everyone disagreed. They were the ones where everyone agreed something had gone wrong. Nobody agreed how much responsibility belonged to whom. Meridian Atlantic announced the first results of its internal review 6 weeks after the flight delay. Marcus read the statement from his office before the company released it publicly. The language was careful. It always was. The airline acknowledged process failures affecting passenger assignment integrity. It announced temporary restrictions on manual premium seating changes. It committed to an independent compliance review. But Marcus noticed what the statement did not say. It did not blame a single employee. It did not pretend one person created the entire problem. That was important, because removing one person would have been easier. It would have allowed everyone else to believe the system had been healthy. Karen called him after the announcement went live. I wanted you to hear this from us before the public response. Marcus looked at the statement on his screen. It happens now. The support specialist who modified your reservation has been removed from customer-facing duties pending the final employment review. Removed from duties. Yes, not terminated. Marcus appreciated the distinction. Too many people confused consequences with performance. An investigation could determine facts. A termination could follow. But skipping directly from accusation to punishment created another kind of failure. What about Thomas Reed? Karen was quiet. His role is under review. Because he changed the seat. Because he created the process? Yes, Marcus nodded. That answer mattered. Responsibility traveled upward when systems allowed harm to repeat. The same afternoon, Marcus received a message from Claire Benton. She had sent him a photograph. It was not of the confrontation, not of the aircraft, not of the people involved. It was a picture of the small notebook she had been carrying that day. On the last page, she had written 2A, Man with leather notebook, checked seat before sitting. L. Marcus stared at the message for a while. A simple note, a small act. But without it, the official record might have looked different. He called her. You kept that? Claire laughed softly. I take notes when I'm traveling. Why? My father was a court reporter. Marcus smiled. That explains a lot. He always said people remember the dramatic parts and forget the ordinary parts. Marcus looked at the boarding pass still tucked inside his desk drawer. He was right. Claire became quiet. Are you satisfied? Marcus thought about the question. Satisfied was complicated. The flight had eventually arrived. The seat had been restored, the system had been examined, but the original moment still existed. The assumption, the request that he move. The question of whether he belonged. No, Marcus said. Claire seemed surprised. Really, I'm glad something changed. He paused. But changing something after it happens doesn't erase what happened. That was the part Marcus struggled with most. People often believe justice worked like a repair bill. Something breaks. Someone pays. Everything returns to normal. But some things did not return. Trust was one of them. A month later, Meridian Atlantic invited Marcus to attend the first review committee meeting as an outside observer. He almost declined. His lawyer advised caution. His business partner asked whether he wanted his name connected to the airline. Marcus understood both concerns. Being involved meant responsibility. It meant criticism. It meant people would say he had too much influence. But he accepted. Not because he wanted a seat at the table, because someone had to ask questions before the next person was moved. At the meeting, the committee reviewed the new controls. Manual seat changes required secondary approval. Employees could no longer add subjective notes about passenger behavior without documented reasons. Complaint patterns would be reviewed independently from revenue classifications. Training would include scenarios involving assumption, escalation, and unequal burden. Marcus listened. Then he asked one question. How will you know this worked? The room went quiet. A few people looked toward the presentation. Compliance officer answered, We'll measure complaints. Only complaints? She paused. Marcus continued. A person can experience a problem and never complain. Nobody disagreed. So they added another measure. Random audits. Passenger feedback sampling. A review of denied accommodations. The change was not dramatic. No press conference, no public celebration. Just a series of small decisions designed to prevent the next person from needing a witness like Claire. Later that evening, Marcus returned home. His daughter was sitting at the kitchen table working on her science project. She looked up. Did they fix it? Marcus put his keys down. He fixed some things. Some? He smiled. Most real fixes start that way. She looked back at her project. What happened to the man who took your seat? Marcus thought about Daniel Whitmore, the man who had benefited from a broken process, the man who had not created it. He apologized. Did you forgive him? Marcus leaned against the counter. I think forgiveness and accountability are different things. His daughter considered that, then nodded. That was the answer Marcus hoped she would remember. Not that people never made mistakes, they did, but that mistakes became something else when people refused to examine why they happened. 3 months after the flight, Meridian Atlantic completed the independent review. The findings were delivered privately first. 1 employee received formal discipline. 2 managers received corrective action plans. The premium support process was redesigned, and the airline issued direct apologies to the affected passengers. Not a general statement. Individual letters, names, acknowledgement, specific failures. Marcus received his letter on a Thursday morning. He read it once, then placed it beside his father's old metal box of receipts, which he had kept after his father passed away. Because records mattered, but so did remembering why they existed. Page 9. Repair under pressure. The apology letter arrived in a plain envelope. Marcus noticed that first. Not the logo, not the signature, the envelope. For months, the entire situation had been surrounded by systems designed to make things feel distant. Reservation numbers, support tickets, internal notes, customer classifications. A plain envelope felt different. It meant someone had chosen to send something that could be held. Inside was a 3-page letter from Meridian Atlantic. It did not say they regretted that Marcus had been inconvenienced. That sentence would have been easier. Instead, it said, Your confirmed assignment was changed without a valid operational reason. Our response after the change placed an unnecessary burden on you to prove information that was already available in our system. Marcus read that sentence twice because it named the real failure, not just the seat change. The burden, the expectation that he would have to explain himself before the system explained itself. He placed the letter on the table. Then he went to work. That was something people misunderstood about moments of conflict. He imagined the confrontation was the important part. But most change happened afterward, in meetings, in revisions, in the uncomfortable conversations where people had to decide whether they wanted a better story or a better system. Weeks later, Marcus joined Meridian Atlantic's first passenger experience review session. This time, the was different. There were fewer people, no presentation screens showing prepared conclusions. Instead, there were case files, bill cases. The 7 passengers affected by the manual adjustment process had all been contacted. 5 responded. 3 agreed to speak directly with the review team. One of them was a teacher from Ohio who said she had never complained because she assumed airlines were too large to care. Another was a small business owner who admitted he almost ignored the incident because he was tired of fighting things that felt impossible to change. Marcus listened. That was the part he believed organizations often skipped. They searched for numbers before listening to people. They measured complaints before understanding silence. During the meeting, Thomas Reed spoke for the first time. His role at Meridian Atlantic had changed. He was no longer leading premium operations. He had accepted a position assisting with the redesign of customer systems. Marcus was surprised when he learned that. Not because he thought Thomas deserved no opportunity, because many people expected accountability to look like disappearance. Sometimes it looked like responsibility. Thomas looked older than he had during their first meeting. "I want to say something," he told the group. Nobody interrupted. When we reviewed the cases, I kept looking for the employee decision that caused the problem. He looked down at the folder in front of him. I was looking for the moment where someone crossed a line. Marcus listened. And there were moments, Thomas continued. But there were also dozens of moments before that where the system made the wrong choice easier. That was the sentence Marcus remembered. Not because it was perfect, because it was honest. A month later, Marcus received a message from Daniel Whitmore. He almost ignored it, not out of anger, because he did not know what remained to say. But he opened it. Daniel wrote, "I have thought about what happened on that plane many times. I kept telling myself I didn't do anything wrong because I didn't ask anyone to move you, but I benefited from a decision that should not have been made." Marcus stared at the message. Daniel continued, "I should have asked why they were moving you instead of accepting that they would." Marcus did not respond immediately. He thought about all the people involved, the employee who made the adjustment, the supervisor who asked for identification, the passenger who accepted an easier solution, the people who watched and looked away. Not everyone carried the same responsibility, but everyone had a choice. Marcus finally replied, "Thank you for saying that." Nothing more. No dramatic forgiveness. No friendship created from a painful moment. Some things were not meant to become perfect endings. They were meant to become honest ones. 6 months after the flight, Meridian Atlantic published its updated customer operations report. The changes were specific. Manual premium seat adjustments had decreased. Independent reviews had increased. Employees had new escalation guidelines. Passenger impact was included as a measurement, not just revenue protection. The company did not claim it had eliminated bias. Marcus appreciated that. Claims of perfection often arrived before evidence. One evening, Marcus sat in his office looking at the leather notebook he had carried onto the flight. The corner was worn. The cover had a small scratch from years of travel. Inside were meeting notes, ideas, unfinished plans, and on the first page, something his father had written years earlier. "Make sure the record tells the whole story." Marcus smiled. For a long time, he thought that meant keeping proof. Now he understood something else. Sometimes the record needed someone willing to ask why it was incomplete. The seat on Flight 482 had been returned. The investigation had ended. The policy had changed. The people responsible had faced consequences. The people affected had been heard. The central question was no longer open. But Marcus knew life rarely ended where a report ended. Because every correction created a new responsibility. And somewhere in a system nobody had examined yet, another decision was waiting. Part 10, The Last Consequence and Open Horizon. 8 months after the flight delay, Marcus returned to Meridian Atlantic one last time. Not for a meeting, not for a review, for a conversation. The company had completed the independent audit. The final results were no longer internal documents sitting behind executive doors. They were part of the airline's public accountability report. The findings were clear. The reservation change that moved Marcus from Seat 2A had violated internal policy. The employee who made the adjustment had received formal disciplinary action after the review determined the decision was based on an assumption about which passenger would be easier to relocate. 2 managers who had approved similar practices without proper oversight received corrective actions. The premium support process was rebuilt. Manual seat changes now required documented reasons, secondary approval, and an automatic review when a confirmed passenger was displaced without an operational necessity. The airline also created a passenger impact review team, not a marketing team, not a reputation team. A team responsible for asking a harder question: who carried the cost when a system made a mistake? Marcus read the final report carefully. It did not say Meridian Atlantic had solved every problem. That was one of the reasons he respected it. Real organizations did not become fair because they published the right words. They became more reliable because they built systems that made the right actions easier and the wrong actions harder. During the closing meeting, Karen Doyle placed the report on the table. "We wanted you to see this before we archived the case." Marcus looked at the cover. Flight 482. The number no longer bothered him. It was strange how objects and events could change meaning. At first, the flight represented a moment when someone questioned whether he belonged. Later, it represented the moment a company was forced to question its own habits. Karen looked at him. "Are you satisfied?" Marcus smiled slightly. "That's a complicated word. I know," he touched the report. "I think the right people ask the right questions." Karen nodded. "It's enough?" "No." Marcus looked out the window. "It's a beginning." Later that afternoon, Marcus visited his father's old workshop. The building had been converted into a small community technology lab through a foundation Marcus created years earlier. Teenagers built robotics projects on old work tables. Students repaired computers. Local business owners attended free workshops on cybersecurity and digital tools. Marcus liked coming there because nobody cared about his company valuation. He cared whether the equipment worked, whether the lesson made sense, whether someone learned something useful. His daughter was there that evening, helping a student troubleshoot a small robot. "You're late," she said. He smiled. "I know," she looked at him. "Big meeting?" "Last one." "Did you win?" Marcus thought about the question. Winning had once meant proving someone wrong. Now it meant something different. "I think the system got better." "That wasn't what I asked." He laughed. "No, I didn't win." She raised an eyebrow. Marcus continued. "I think a lot of people learned something." She accepted that answer. Maybe because she was older now. Maybe because she understood that some victories did not look like celebrations. They looked like fewer people having to experience the same problem. That night, Marcus placed the original boarding pass into a folder with the final report. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. The paper had never been powerful by itself. The power came from people deciding it mattered. A month later, Marcus received a message from Karen. There was no emergency, no accusation. Just a question. He knew. Passenger Advocacy Group had contacted Meridian Atlantic after reading the public report. They had a different issue involving accessibility accommodations at smaller regional airports. Different system, different people, different facts. But the group believed the same question needed to be asked. Marcus read the message twice, then he closed his laptop. The old version of himself would have immediately stepped in. The person who built companies. He solved problems, took control. But he had learned something from Flight 482. Not every problem needed one powerful person to fix it. Sometimes the better question was who needed to be heard. Next morning, Marcus called Karen back. "I'll review the information," he said. "Not a promise to lead, not a promise to take over, just a willingness to look." Outside his office window, the city moved through another ordinary day. Planes left airports. People took their assigned seats. Systems continued making thousands of decisions nobody noticed. And somewhere inside those systems, fairness still depended on whether someone was willing to ask one simple question before moving another person aside. Why them?